Hello, everyone. These are my thoughts on Black Flag's Damaged. Punk is a unique but very influential genre that kind of blossomed from many different proto punk bands before a certain album dropped. There were certain bands such as the Stooges and the Modern Lovers that brought styles of what punk was going to be. Um, but there was one album that kind of dropped and influenced everything for me in my listening journey, and that was the Ramones' self-titled. It was as if the Ramones self-titled dropped, and then music just changed significantly. There was all these new styles and all these new unique albums that were being dropped back to back to back. It seemed, and it came after that one album. There were so many new styles that were being introduced after the introduction of punk by the Ramones and the I guess the refining of that sound by bands such as the Sex Pistols and the Clash, and that was things like post punk and new wave from many different bands and artists, all bringing some wonderful, unique, and really enjoyable. Some are actually my favorite albums I've ever heard coming out from that point in 1976, 1977. Of course, punk didn't just introduce that DIY aspect, it also introduced a platform for a rebellious voice. It was as if there were two paths, right? And those two paths could have been you go down that aforementioned, new wave, post punk, artsy sound, or you continue to go down the more rebellious, more kind of rough and non conforming sound, such as no wave, experimental post punk, this kind of industrial sound, and of course, hardcore punk. Hardcore punk wasn't just a sound that you could put down to just like one or two bands. It was a sound that was really being pushed forward in the early 1980s. And Black Flag is one of those bands that happened to really push that sound forward. I've heard some hardcore punk stuff leading up to this point. Definitely heard some more rough and aggressive post punk stuff as well. Dead Kennedys is obviously a band that really I've heard a lot from, and X as well had some really wild songs in their albums as well. But there was a sound that was missing for me. Considering how aggressive and rough and fiery hardcore punk was, I was really expecting one band to kind of take that sound and really rev up the engines and really make it sound a bit more aggressive and take out everything from the inside and really talk about stuff that is a bit more reflective and introspective rather than the kind of mad at the world the political stuff that I was listening to a lot of at this point of time, or at that point of time. And lo and behold, I come across Black Flag, and it's safe to say that the Damaged does definitely tick the box I was looking for there. Does fill in that gap for sure. Now, Black Flag are a band that I had not heard before this album. I knew who they were. I've heard of the band before, but I've never heard any of their songs before. I've never heard any of their material. I didn't even come across their EPs during this journey of mine. So this was a brand new, fresh listen. And I did obviously do a lot of research on what they were and how they came up. Californian band seems like a lot of these hardcore punk bands were really coming out of that California scene. And this was a band that was a little bit more independent. Yeah, they were in a record label, and I understand that they did sign a major label deal before this album, but then they had some disputes, and he released under SST anyway, and all this history there. But again, it is a band that I was not familiar with, and I did listen to some of their EPs and singles before this point, and they did have some really enjoyable stuff, really catchy material, really catchy songs, and they had a bunch of different singers, such as, I believe his name was Descadana, I don't remember, but I believe that was his name. They had another singer before him too, and they did well on their songs too. It was some really catchy stuff. However, it wasn't quite grabbing the aggression and the passion that I thought I could get from the songs, especially from a song like Six Pack. which is a great track, and we'll come across that later. But then, of course, in this album, it's a different singer. The singer's Henry Rollins, and his voice is insane. He is constantly growling and releasing this rough. It's like he's just growling through every song, and I can't imagine doing that. I can't imagine the damage it probably had on his voice box, but he does it throughout the album, and he delivers it in different ways for each song that actually really does work in the context of this album. And yeah, it does come across to create this wild mesh of aggression, of almost sadness as well. But there is a bit of humor in the lyrics on some certain songs as well. It's very, very good. And let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. There's some good stuff on here. Now, first things first, we're going to talk about the sound itself. It is this really aggressive, fiery, just fast-paced album. The sound is like as if the drums are just clattering all over the place. Guitars are just being absolutely, destroyed in the process. They are playing with a lot of fire on here. And the sound and style and lyrics, if you kind of mesh that Ramones punk sound with some stuff that you might hear from Suicide's debut album or second album, and you also mix that with a little bit of heavy metal as well, you create what this album is. It's like a love child of those three sounds. Start off with the first couple tracks that are a little bit more rebellious, talking about society and the world around them, the government, oppression. Rise Above is almost anthemic in its nature. It's very, very catchy. It's very enjoyable to listen to sing along with. And I really appreciate how it almost just doesn't quite talk about anybody in specific. It's more just talking about that feeling of being oppressed by somebody higher above. And you can apply that to many different natures and many different situations. So I feel like it's a song that anybody that is within our, working class or within our realm can kind of jive along with and understand the emotions towards. The second song, Spray Paint, is also kind of delivering that rebellious vibe as well. The idea of standing up against people that have set the rules and graffitiing the walls, vandalizing, do what you need to do. It's almost kind of like an anarchy vibe, very similar to some stuff that you might hear from the Sex Pistols. However, after these two tracks, the album goes down a different direction, thematically in my opinion, and kind of goes more towards talking about the culture and the society and the people that I assume Rollins and the band were around a lot at the time in California. And it isn't just California, it could be America in general, could be the Western world in general. I feel like this is something that even to this day, a lot of people can resonate with. TV Party criticizing the TV lifestyle, sitting at home, chilling with the lads, getting yourself some beers and watching just some brain rot television. Six Pack, again, talking about that need to go and get yourself some beers, get yourself some drinks, hang around and drink your time away. I also really like how TV Party kind of talks about being fed information by a certain news channel or a certain TV company, and you fixating on what they tell you and getting everything that you need to know from those TV channels and that TV news rather than going out and seeing it for yourself. It's something that we see all the time on Twitter. Twitter feeds you misinformation all the time, and a lot of people take that stuff and take it as gospel, and they say, oh, this place is unsafe, or this place is somewhere you can't go to, this place has low IQ and all this other stuff. When in reality, if you actually go to those locations, you notice it isn't what the world makes it seem, or the Twitter world makes it seem like. It's very similar to what the people in the 80s had to deal with these news channels that were probably biased towards certain viewpoints and certain narratives. The next track then starts to talk about alcoholism, but in a little bit more of a addictive way, talking about drinking your pain and your sorrows away, And it does really now start to tap into stuff that's a little bit more reflective and introspective of the person that is drinking heavily. The narratives that they start to take from this point onwards is where it starts to get a lot more dark, starts to get a lot more personal, and I genuinely love the material from this point onwards. Before TV Party, What I See is a song that really captures the feeling of conflict, inner conflict and turmoil. Specifically, I mean, the iconic lyrics, I want to live, I wish I was dead, really captures that. I guess maybe talking about how he really does want to deal with the situation that he's in. He wants to get rid of those feelings of depression, and he wants to live and move forward, but it's taken a hold of him. That inner conflict within living and dying is something that really is profound, but also very, very emotional, and you feel a lot of sadness for him and why he's feeling that. Also talking about how dying is something that is inevitably painful, scary, so he doesn't want to experience that pain, and he doesn't want to deal with and face death, but at the same time he also realizes that it's painful living, with all the conflict and the emotions that he feels, and how he's confused by his own emotions, which you see a lot of on Damaged 2, that song Damaged 2. Yeah, it's something that he really is challenging and battling with, and it does create some confusion mentally in his head. Gimme Gimme Gimme, which is talking about somebody who is using some form of drug or some form of vice to cover up their pains. Could be cocaine, could be alcohol, as mentioned before. Whatever it might be, it really does capture that addictive nature, and how that damaged individual requires that thing in order to function, despite the fact that they know that that thing is going to kill them. Depression is a song that really captures that feeling of sadness and isolation and anger, and it really does say it in a fashion of like, I can't let this go. This is something that has grabbed me and held on to me, and I really can't escape from it. This feeling of depression is taking a hold of me, which links to a lot of the reasons behind why in other songs people tend to grab onto those vices. It's like it's giving a reason behind the alcoholism that somebody might experience, or the drug addiction that somebody might experience. Room 13 has this wild instrumentation, this fiery kind of revving guitar riff that is like it's pulling back and then letting go, and then pulling back and then letting go. It's a amazing instrumental. I love the background instrumentation of this song. It's kind of talking about I guess maybe somebody being locked up or being strapped in like a mental hospital, and how they're dependent on somebody else to survive, to function. They need that other person, and they are dependent on that person, because without that person, they feel like they will die. They won't survive in this world, and yeah, that feeling of dependence, but also linking that to other songs where he talks about how he's lonely and nobody wants me and I'm isolated. It's like you combine the two things together, and it's a recipe for disaster, really, isn't it? Padded Cell kind of touches up on a similar tone to Room 13, but instead of talking about mental hospital or being locked up or whatever it might be that he is wrapped up in, it's describing the earth as a padded cell, how he feels depressed and controlled and lied to in the world that he lives in, and he accepts the fact that he probably had a very rough upbringing, had to deal with a lot of things coming up as a child and as a teenager that influenced his feelings now. But he knows that even now, because of those feelings, he does that feeling of depression and anger. It's not something that you could just take away, something that you could just talk through. It's something that it's constantly there, feeding at him. No matter how much he tries to get rid of it, nobody wants to come near him. Nobody wants to touch him, because he knows that no matter what they do, he's going to harm them. No more accepts the reality of his situation. He's looking back in hindsight at his childhood, how it might have influenced his life, but also realizes that he's being controlled by the society that he lives in. And so that collection of feelings and anger and just frustration is just being absolutely blasted in this song, with these drums that sound like they've probably been broken 10 times performing, guitars how that I'm surprised managed to last throughout the recording of this song. And it's just this is like an explosion of rage that I really do enjoy listening to, for sure. All of those conflicts that we've spoken about in this video, the conflicts of, depression and happiness and sadness and all these other feelings that you might have, the conflict of killing yourself but then also wanting to stay alive, the concept of being controlled or oppressed by somebody above, being controlled by the society you live in, being controlled by some form of police or some form of governing body, and then also dealing with the feelings and the conflicts of the harm you're doing to other people, the feelings of isolation, alienation, and keeping yourself at a distance from other people, knowing that you are probably going to cause them harm in the future. That kind of pessimistic view of relationship, and that collection of turmoil and feeling is captured into one song at the end, where it seems like Henry Rollins, or the person he's trying to portray, is going insane, going crazy. It's like the song is talking about the mind of Rollins, or the narrator, and it's just this like kind of slow, very static, but also very heavy instrumentation with wild growls and screams and flashes of lyrics talking about keeping away from people. There's a lyric in there about how if somebody tries to reach out to help, he'll bite the hand. Things of self-harm, depression. And it's as if you are listening to somebody going insane after all of those feelings have been collected and collated into one person. To me, I think that ending really does bring everything together into one final song, and provides a very, very fashionable, I guess relatively fashionable end to this album. This album really does capture the anger and frustration of somebody who is truly on the edge, truly on the pinnacle of a tipping point, mentally and emotionally. And I think that is something that does capture the feeling of a lot of young people at the time, particularly teenagers at the time in the early 80s. And I think to this day, it still can capture the anger and frustration of a lot of young people now, and a lot of teenagers now, dealing with very similar tones and concepts and very similar real world things that relate to a lot of the stuff that was spoken about on this album. I think this is a very, very good album, a very, very strong track list, very, very strong themes that are captured well in these songs. And yeah, I think if you are looking for that fire, that anger, that angst, it is everything that you are looking for on this album, for sure. I'm personally putting this in the S tier. I think this is a phenomenal listen. I don't have many things to criticize about it. I think if I could nitpick and talk about maybe certain lyrics, or maybe how catchy a song is compared to other songs, but I think every song is enjoyable in its own respect, whether it's catchy or not. And I think if not only if you enjoy punk, you should listen to this, but if you just are joining me on this journey, I think this is definitely a must listen. I can imagine this album being pretty influential on future bands. Again, we are on this journey together. It's not like I've gone and heard 1983 and 4 albums, so I don't know what influence this might have, but I predict that this album probably had a big influence on many, many bands in the future. I know one for sure. I know Nirvana were really influenced by Black Flag and the stuff that they were talking about and the song styles that they were using on this album. But yeah, I just, even in like the very near future from 1981, I do see a lot of bands taking this sound forward, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more Black Flag stuff as well. I don't know where Black Flag are gonna take it from here, but I know for a fact that they don't drop an album for another 3 years, because of label disputes with Unicorn and stuff like that. I'm eager to hear if they come back and deliver something similar, or if they take into a whole different direction. I don't know, but either way, I look forward to it. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate anybody that has tuned in and taken whatever I've said forward, and I look forward to talking about the next one. All right. Oh, thank you for joining me. Join the journey. Bye.